You're listening to a CNA podcast.
As far as defense summits go, this year's Shangri-La Dialogue had it all. The big names, including the French president.
France is a friend and an ally of the United States, and is a friend, and we do cooperate, even if sometimes we disagree and compete with China.
And the U.S. Defense Secretary.
Many countries are tempted by the idea of seeking both economic cooperation with China and defense cooperation with the United States. Now, that is a geographic necessity for many. But beware the leverage that the CCP seeks with that entanglement. Economic dependence on China only deepens their malign influence and complicates our defense decision space during times of tension.
Plus Malaysia's Prime Minister.
Malaysia does not believe in spheres of influence. History has shown that when major powers attempt to divide the world into exclusive zones of control, smaller nations are often left voiceless.
Some felt China was voiceless, given it didn't dispatch its defense minister for the first time since 2019. But the lower-level delegation Beijing sent, and some analysts said it was no big deal.
I don't believe that China's voice is not heard, because on the policy issues, I think people are quite familiar with China's policies. And what makes Chinese policy different from Americans is that they are very much consistent.
As always, the sparring and strong rhetoric were on display.
Both Vietnam and Malaysia have differences with China in South China Sea. Yet, both countries have effectively managed these differences with China. So my question is, why can't the Philippines do the same?
If what China is doing to the Philippines is done to Malaysia or to any ASEAN country, you would see a different reaction.
Do not, dance with the wind. This is actually what we have seen. For example, in the first round of the tariff war, who has blinked? It's not China.
And there was no shortage of issues ranging from Taiwan and Ukraine to drones and missile defense shields to undersea cables and outer space priorities.
A month ago, we opened in Estonia a new drone center, drone warfare. It's the future thing. No, not future. It's a present in Ukrainian frontline.
We are particularly concerned by reports that Russia is considering placing a nuclear weapons system into space.
We also need to update the legal instruments that we have because, of course, we do value freedom of navigation very much. That is a key principle. But we also see that Russia and others are abusing these principles in order to put pressure on us.
Security at this year's Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, as usual, was tight outside the hotel and inside, which naturally got some officials a tad nervous and agitated, which in turn led to the occasional run-in between reporters and officials.
Just one word, please. One word from you. How's your meeting with ASEAN? What did you talk about?
All witnessed and experienced firsthand by CNA's correspondents on the ground at the Dialogue, Olivia, Siong, and Leong Kid. Welcome to the show.
Yay!
Hi, Arnold.
Okay, so I want to set the tone for this podcast. I'm going to ask you to describe the Shangri-La Dialogue in a very quick sentence, in a light-hearted sort of a way. And I'll give you my own perspective because this is the first time I've covered the Shangri-La Dialogue. And after I've seen, what I saw, I would describe the Shangri-La Dialogue as speed dating for defense ministers. Everyone is checking each other out. And there are two favorites, right? There are two favorites there, the US and China. They know they're the favorites. And they aren't afraid to take full advantage of the fact that they are the favorites. So, all right, Olivia, ladies first. You tell me.
Well, I have to go after the speed dating analogy. No pressure. Okay, but the first thing that came to mind was that the Shangri-La Dialogue is like people watching on steroids. And it's military diplomacy happening in a fully functioning hotel. Yes, there are the big speeches, the bold statements in the main ballroom, hundreds of people, delegates on that stage where the spotlight is. But a lot of the real action also is in the quiet corners, the bilaterals, the off-record meetings, the subtle knowing looks between the delegates, like, you know what I'm talking about? Yes. Did you hear that? Yes, I did. That kind of situation. Even the meetings at the lounge, who's talking to who? It's people watching. What does that raised eyebrow mean? What does that look mean?
There's a lot of power walking. You've got groups of people in uniform or in power suits, and they were walking like with importance. And then sometimes you are talking to each other and you're like, oh, who's that? It's a lot of that. Even among journalists, we sit with friends from other news agencies, and if you so much as to get up and go to the restroom, they'll be like, what's happening? I'll be like, guys, I'm just going to the restroom. It's people watching on steroids because you want to catch certain people and you see whether they are interacting with each other. And like what Ollie said, the quiet corners, we love hanging out in the hotel lobby where we could sit with one another and then we can watch who's coming in. And anybody who comes in, if we know them, we invite them over, have a chat and see what intel we can get from them.
You obviously saw some of the things I saw. So there were a lot of smiles. Some were genuinely warm. There was recognition when they bump into each other. Other smiles seem a bit forced. And there were, very clearly moments of tension as well. Olivia, you chased down a Chinese delegate member after one of the sessions, and you got him to say this.
Yeah, that was Chinese delegate Professor Qi Peng with the People's Liberation Army's National Defense University's National Security College. To give you some context, he had posed a question to the Philippines Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro, who had hit out at the, quote, overreach of the Chinese Communist Party in a speech. And he had some strong words to say about the dispute and increased confrontations in the South China Sea. Professor Qi then posed a question. He asked why the Philippines couldn't manage its differences with China, like Malaysia and Vietnam, which are also claimant states. The Philippines Defense Secretary then jabbed back, thanking Professor Qi and another Chinese delegate who had raised a question for, quote, the propaganda disguised as questions, and saying that the main problem with China was a deficit of trust. So if you were in the room, what you would have noticed was that there were some delegates who actually chuckled and some even clapped, smiled, and you would imagine the Chinese would not have taken to that well. So I knew straight away that after the session ended, I wanted to go and speak to the delegates and to get their response. So we walked with Professor Qi and asked him, the Chinese delegation had been quite low-key. They weren't really speaking to the media like this in the last few days. And this was the final day of the Shangri-La Dialogue. But this time, when I just asked him a simple question, what did you think of that response you got? And straight away he told me, 不满意. He was unsatisfied.
Right.
And then he had to duck off to go to the washroom. We did not follow. We do respect boundaries here.
Okay.
But
there are lines that you will not cross. Good.
For sure. But it was clear that he wanted to also just, voice his, they weren't happy with that response. And when he came out again, we approached him and asked him again to elaborate on what he meant by being unsatisfied. And he told us that he felt that it was just a very perfunctory sort of response, a token reply, and he didn't appreciate his question being dismissed as propaganda.
So did you sense real frustration, perhaps a little bit of, anger from him?
Yeah, I think there was frustration. His questions were like, if this question were to be posed to others, would that be considered propaganda? You're talking about dialogue here, but this is the response that we got. He left very quickly after making that statement. Okay. So you could sense that they were frustrated. But I think there's also recognition that given that they had a lower representation level at this year's Shangri-La Dialogue, that there was also so much that they could say to another defense secretary.
Right. Yeah. Wykid, I just want to quickly play what the Defense Secretary of the Philippines actually said.
The comparison between the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Let us not forget that while we are members of ASEAN, we are sovereign countries, each with its own territorial integrity and sovereignty. And I am sure that if what China is doing to the Philippines is done to Malaysia or to any ASEAN country, you would see a different reaction.
Your first reaction will be like, ooh. And then you're going to look around the room to see how people are reacting. I must say that the room was professional. You would expect perhaps drama, such as people storming out of rooms or protesting. But then again, we have to be very careful to not overread the room, because for all you know, sometimes when certain comments are made, if a person walks out of the room, for all you know, it may just be a washroom visit, right? So all these things, it's very hard to put together to form some form of analysis. But I must say, to answer your question, when these remarks are made, they are made because whomever made those remarks feel that it's important to make them. But those on the receiving end, I must say, they're quite, even if they say they're unhappy, it is a respectful form of reaction. They don't stand up and point and say, no, I disagree, right? Of course, from a viewer's point of view, from a lay person's point of view, you want to watch such drama. But I must say that even though tensions may seem high at such conferences, they are quite respectful at the end of the day.
Did it feel at this particular dialogue, that at times, maybe not throughout, that some countries were sort of ganging up against China? Because I saw that interview you did, Olivia, with the retired senior colonel, Zhou Po, and it seemed also he sounded actually very wistful, like he missed the former U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Here's what he said.
Lloyd Austin said in 2023 and 2024 that he believed a conflict is not imminent or inevitable. But Hegseth said that he believes it is imminent, but hope it will not happen. So this is a change of 180 degrees.
I'm not sure if the word I use is wistful. I think the Chinese would expect at the Shangri-La Dialogue that China, to a certain extent, would be criticized. That's something that they had expected. But what they perhaps found different, expected or not, was the kind of language that the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth used, which they felt was a lot more sharp in terms of its criticism of China. So, going into the US Defense Secretary's speech, a lot of talk had been, what will he say? How critical is he going to be? Given the trade truce at the moment, will this affect how he delivers the message? But as he spoke, it became very clear that he was going to be very explicit. He said that there was no reason to sugarcoat the threat that China poses in the South China Sea or over Taiwan. And I wanted to make sure, Waikid said, that I wasn't overreading into this kind of language. So in the ballroom, I was on my laptop and quickly pulled up Lloyd Austin's speech from last year's Shangri-La Dialogue, did a quick Control F, word search, and put in China. It didn't come up except for the use to refer to the Chinese defense minister or the South China Sea. The former defense secretary was never so explicit in spelling out the China threat. And I think why this matters is not so much because of it's dramatic or anything like that, but it kind of solidifies the approach that the US is going to take. And now China is seeing it very clearly that this is how it's going to be approached.
Waikid, what sort of an effect, what sort of an impact did it have, on ASEAN member countries? Did it, I suppose you could broadly say maybe there are two groups there. Did it solidify and unify these two groups in any way?
There's always this room for such, can I use the word conflict? No, I cannot use the word conflict. Whatever it is, from ASEAN's viewpoint, right, there's always room for these unexpected moments where you have heated arguments about certain topics. You cannot expect everybody to come into the room with the same points of view and they will agree on certain things. Some parties may make their point more forcefully than others, but it is all, for the lack of a better phrase, all in a day's work for ASEAN because they expect these types of exchanges to take place. ASEAN will always say they will divert everything back to let's talk peacefully, let's open up channels of communication. Then, if they say things sort of get out of hand or are a bit uncomfortable for ASEAN, they will bring them in and say, hey, let's talk. Let's talk behind closed doors or let's talk properly so that we can resolve issues in dialogue format.
Right.
A lot of people, like you said, I'm very interested to hear from the US and China, but because China's defense minister wasn't in attendance, they didn't get a big plenary session. So the only time we actually got to hear from the head of the delegation was in one of these smaller breakout sessions. And if you were there, you will see that the room is just, I would say not even half the size of that ballroom. And so delegates were lining up, including myself. And you had to get there early so that I could get even into the room because it's
So
maximum
the interest
capacity.
was intense. Everyone wanted to hear.
Definitely. I was just, standing with another journalist friend, and then everyone, they had cue post out, and there were instructions being given, people like, don't rush. Only those with the white badges will be allowed in. My friend said to me, doesn't it feel like we are lining up for like the hottest nightclub in town? I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a good analogy. I have to use it. And it did feel like that because once the doors opened, like people were just like rushing in to get a seat, and it's a small session.
Right.
But that was really the only time you could hear from them. And you could feel the frustration from the Chinese delegation. Straight off the bat, Rear Admiral Hu, when it was his turn to speak, there was a panel of about 5 people with other representatives from other countries. But he straight up said that, allow me some time because I want to address the speech that just took place, which was the US Defense Secretary's speech. And he said he, straight off did not accept the ungrounded accusations against China. This was a session that was supposed to be on maritime security cooperation, but he felt a need to address it straight off, even though it was not exactly on topic. And then we saw many statements from China. I wouldn't say they were voiceless. It's just being voiced in different ways.
I was looking at some of the raw footage when we came back, and I came across this.
Actually, then we should then shouldn't be both of us. Because before your Anwar is me.
30 seconds. Tease. What? Tease. How much will the strong words exchange between China and the US affect actual engagement by these two superpowers on the security front?
And why, kid? I saw this for you.
Wait, sweat. Right here at the Shangri-La, right here at the Shangri-La, Singapore. For 3 days a year, this place becomes a geopolitical beehive with hundreds of people representing dozens of countries coming in and out of this building.
So, okay, tell us about what happens actually in between. I mean, I always imagine, attending a dialogue like this to be like a stakeout. 90% of the time, you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And then you find out, oh, I'm waiting at the wrong place. Then you run, to the other location. And then you find, oh, okay, fine. And then so that's 5%. I mean, would you say, that describes what being at a summit and waiting for people, the newsmakers, the policymakers to say something? Is that reflective of your experience on the ground?
The military people like to say you wait to rush and rush to wait, right? So it's quite true.
I always say this to newsmakers. I will always tell them, I don't need exclusives. I just cannot be excluded. And because I have this mindset, I am very free with my information, and I'm not stressed out because I'm not there to chase an exclusive. And therefore, it allows me to enjoy my work. Now, a lot of my journalist friends from other news agencies, they have the same mindset, but they know that as such a platform, it's always good to share information. So sometimes someone will say, hey, I heard so-and-so will make appearance at this place. And then we spread the word, regardless whether we are in the same news agency or not. We tell one another, and then we all show up in the same place. And then as you approach that location and you see other members of the media there, and then you tell yourself, okay, good, I'm in the correct place. And even if it's the wrong place, at least everyone is waiting there.
Everyone got it wrong.
Exactly. So it's quite stress-free because I allow myself to have some room for imperfection, and that allows us to enjoy our work.
I think for this year especially, there was a lot of uncertainty relating to the Chinese delegation, who they were going to send. Is the defense minister going to turn up? And you just hear a lot of things from different sources and people. And so at the Shangri-La Dialogue, it's great because, everyone's there and you're exchanging information. I heard this, I heard that. Can you confirm this? But of course, we also needed to wait for official confirmation. But it's also that camaraderie, and it makes your job easier. And at the end of the day, we are all able to put out a better story. So that definitely is, how it works. And then a lot of time also, again, I say that we have to mug. Is like mugging for an exam because there are so many topics that could potentially come up. And so the prep work starts like weeks or even months before, just kind of reading. And because on the ground, you don't have time to be like unfamiliar with the topic. You have to react. You have to know what the right question to ask is, because you may only have that 10 seconds down a corridor with some defense secretary or some chief of the defense staff, and
so you get one
can't
chance.
miss that opportunity.
You just get one chance. And if
Exactly.
it goes by, you miss it completely.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh, you know.
And the boss is going to ask you, why didn't you get that? Why didn't you ask that question? I want to ask you now about Singapore's Defense Minister, Chun Sing. You know, his first time as Defense Minister there. I got the sense that he was actually comfortable. I mean, he was very smiley, and he had a press conference, which he took a whole range of questions. And to me, he kind of like was in his wheelhouse.
One thing I noticed about Defense Minister Chun Sing was his decidedly calm body language. Because if you know him, he's very informal. Sometimes he sees me, he's like, hey, what are you doing here? Because he knows I'm based overseas, right? And he's very informal and very candid. The first thing I noticed was really how he sat. I think he crossed his legs, his hands were on his knees, and he spoke very slowly. And that to me is deliberate calmness because, number one, he's making his speech for the first time. He's also taking questions for the first time as defense minister. Mm-hmm. And I think when he was introduced on stage, one of the introductions was he's, Ollie, 10 days into his role, right? Yeah, 10 days into his role as defense minister.
Okay.
To me, it feels like he's done pretty okay because there's a lot of pressure, right, for him as a first-time defense minister, stepping into the shoes of Wang Ying-hen.
Right. So exactly, I was going to ask Ollie this particular question. I mean, if you put the two men, side by side, both very capable, and Wang Ying-hen obviously has done it for a long time. Chun Sing is qualified, being a former chief of army. I mean, is it fair to make a comparison? I mean, do you share some of Wai-Kit's views when it comes to our defense minister?
I think the pressure is really there because you're not just making your debut on the international stage as Singapore's new defense minister, which is an important portfolio, but you're also representing Singapore as a host. And so it was interesting because I would imagine defense minister would be extremely busy. He's having bilats, he's having multilats, and it's just like so many things going on. But one of the days I had been walking to one of the bilat rooms, and I was walking by the Shangri-La pool, and suddenly I noticed there were like security officers like around me. I looked behind. Oh, Min Chan was there. And he did the same thing to me.
He was going swimming?
Nah, he was walking with his delegation to his next meeting.
Okay.
Not that relaxed.
Okay.
But he still had the time to, he saw me and because I was like, we were walking in the same direction. They were going to an ASEAN defense ministers meeting with the US Defense Secretary.
Okay.
And he said, hey, you're back. And I was like, yeah, not on holiday, but here to work. So that came across, and he was, not just meeting people. He brought people to the Marina Basins. He went cycling with one of the defense ministers. So it was just seemed like really a lot of activity, and playing host, I think, was important. And one of the comments from him that struck me was when he was asked about the absence of the Chinese defense minister. And he said, yes, the Chinese are not around, but he said that it was also incumbent on other countries to reach out to China to build bridges so that, you avoid misinterpreting each other's positions. And he called on China to make use of every opportunity, including the Shangri-La Dialogue, to make its perspective understood.
Wai-Kit, you had a moment, with the new Secretary of Defense for the United States as well, Pete Hegseth, and the organizers. And this is how it went.
Just one word. How was your meeting with ASEAN? Just one word, please. One word from you. How was your meeting with ASEAN? One word.
Okay.
I love it so much.
I don't know whether anyone else has seen this. You have, Olivia.
I've watched it so many times.
I have as well. And did you notice how Wai-Kit was jumping up and down at the very start?
That has to do with like the voice projection thing,
So it was jumping up and down, and I have to say I admire you, Wai-Kit. You were so brave, right, to do what you did. I mean, I suppose this is in many ways old school, very traditional, but you did it. So tell us what was on your mind when you shouted that question, and you shouted it repeatedly as well.
Sure. So this is the thinking behind this whole one word story. All the journalists were gathered outside the area where Pete Hegseth was going to be walking out. So we had a quick meeting and I said, okay, guys, this is what I plan to do. I have the loudest voice. Let me shout the first question. But you know that in such situations, they are always walking very fast. They don't have time to give you long sentences. So I said, well, what can I do to get his attention? Firstly, I'm Singaporean. Number two, you're in my country. So I said, okay, guys, I'm just going to say, good morning, welcome to Singapore, so that we get his attention. And then someone mentioned, hey, talk about his workout video because he did a workout with the US Marines that morning. So I said, okay, good.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I started saying in my head, the moment I see him, I'll say, good morning, welcome to Singapore, great workout. So you can get his attention. And then the tactic was for Ollie, who has the CNA mic, to then swoop in with a question. So he walked past us. I got his attention. And he mentioned that, I always do it when I have the chance to, correct?
I'm always happy to work out with the American troops.
Okay.
Yeah. So you know that he wants to engage.
Yep.
But after that, when everybody started asking him questions about...
That was attempt number 1, by the way. So these are separate attempts. That was... This one that Waikid's talking about, to give you some context, was earlier in the day.
Right.
Yeah.
So sort of a dry run. And from there, I know a few things. That he's always on the move very fast, but he wants to engage, and he doesn't want to engage on serious topics, right? Because the moment you ask him about China, he walks away. And then he doesn't even look at you. So you sort of read that person a little bit. Yep. So attempt number 2, I was like, okay, he had just met the ASEAN defense ministers, and you want to get a sense of how the meeting went. There's no time for an open-ended response. You also don't want to ask a yes-no question. So I thought, maybe just one word. Good, bad, whatever. Then I thought to myself, the moment I see him, I will then shout that one word question so that as he approaches me, he has time to process his thought. So that when he reaches me and my microphone, he could hopefully give me something. So that was the thinking behind the whole...
And you had a bonus. You got 2 words.
Yes.
Which were constructive
and... fruitful. And it was constructive and positive. Which is important news lines, right?
Which wasn't picked up by the camera. What was picked up was listen to instructions. Move aside, please. The organizers and his minders obviously weren't too happy with what you were doing, Waikid. Did you get into trouble? Was there a warning issue or anything like that? No.
No, in fact, we met his press person, and it was really like, how things are going and everything. I think everyone recognizes they have a job to do. So there is that mutual recognition.
Okay, so Ollie, you didn't misbehave the way Waikid did?
Well, I don't have as booming a voice as Waikid. But I think it's also like what Waikid mentioned, it's like, it's also understanding who you're approaching. So, for example, for me, I know that culture and how you speak to people makes a difference. The way you approach the Chinese delegation, the kind of questions you ask them, that also makes a difference. Yeah.
Final question for the two of you about the Shangri-La Dialogue. And I want, again, both of you to be very honest. Is it can't wait for Shangri-La Dialogue 2026 or thank God it only happens once a year?
Who's listening to this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you this analogy.
Yep.
The SLD is like running a marathon. I'm a marathoner myself. So I know the training, the hard work that goes into marathon training. It is very, very tough. But the moment you cross the finishing line, you'll be like, I will do it again. So it's like that. The mugging with Ollie is real. She will bring tonic from China, and then late nights we will make tonic drinks, and then we will work. And then 1 or 2 weeks before the SLD starts, we are already in Singapore meeting contact after contact to discuss issues, to take notes.
And the camera crew also with the logistics, where to position itself, how many crew, because there's so many things going on. It's a huge number of people being involved in this. Yeah.
Right. You haven't answered the question yet, Ollie, by the way. I'm not letting you go, okay? Waikid has,
I will do it year after year as long as I'm working with people who are passionate about what they do. And so far, everyone on the team, Arnold, Ollie, the camera crew, so much fun. So I will do it year after year.
Like, how do I follow that? Okay, but I'll be honest.
Yeah.
At the end of it, I was like, I am tired.
Same.
I think it's one of those things, right? Like, we're in the news business, so things move fast, and then the next news event comes on. But this one is different. I think partly because it's in Singapore, and it's a yearly event, and then you have important people here. Yep. somehow, if you're a news junkie like we are, it gets your adrenaline going. And it's also hard to rest or to sleep at night because my brain is just going and going. So only when it's over, you feel like, heave a sigh of relief and not think about next year yet. But when the time comes, I'm happy to do it because it is exciting and important. So yes, I would do it again.
Olivia and Waikit, thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnold.
And thank you for listening to the CNA Correspondent Podcast. As always, you can catch reports from all our correspondents on CNA's YouTube channel and CNA.Asia. And please note, the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Now, the team behind this week's edition is Saye Win, Clara Ong, Craig Dale, Tiffany Ang, Junaini Johari, Arjun Bala, and myself, Arnold Gay. Thank you very much for joining us.